Hello, AP Seminar students. I am broadcasting from your classroom, room 1217, and I'm here to remind you of what a journey you've been on as you've been completing your individual written argument, your IWA. Most of you, when school went out, already knew what your research question was, and were trying to decide what part of the question you were going to take a position on, what your thesis would be. And many of you identified reasons why you could support this thesis here. While you've been on break, I've asked you to complete writing the body paragraphs that these reasons here lead. So many of you by now have already written 3 body paragraphs in support of your thesis, and many of you have already identified 2 reasons why an opponent would not believe your thesis, and written counter arguments about those 2 reasons. So we're getting near the end of this first draft writing process, and the next process is the one about writing a solution. Now I have made reference to this document here, which has 2 sample solutions on it, and I realize that looking at so much text for so many of you is not going to make this easy to write, even though I've highlighted the features of what makes for a good solution, and I've shown how these features show up in both of the solutions. I realize that we need to take this a little bit slower. So what you're going to find in Google Classroom is you're going to find a document that looks like this. It says planning the solution for my IWA. And this has 2 parts to it. It has part 1 and it has part 2. And you're going to turn these into me separately. So after you do part 1, I'm going to ask you to leave me a phone number where I can call you because I want to talk about part 1. There's this really hard part up here about taking your research question and relating it back to a problem. And a lot of you will remember earlier in the year when we were doing the IRR, the individual research report, you had to at the end get together with your teammates, kind of read what all of you had written and researched about, and you had to propose different solutions. In the IWA, you just need to propose one solution. But there are some features about proposing this one solution that are similar to what you did when you were doing the team multimedia presentation. So I want to show you that when you plan your solution, what I need to see is I need to say, just remind me again, what was your research question? What was your thesis? What were those 3 reasons that you wrote about to support your thesis, and what were your 2 counter arguments? This part is easy because you're just repeating things you've already done. But here where I start talking about a problem, I said, well, how are you going to help your reader see your research question, your question as a problem? So that's what I want to work on right now, and I want to show you some of the research questions that kids in AP Seminar have come up with this year. I'm really proud of some of these. So if you see one up here, it might be one that you did already. So should student loan debt be forgiven? That's a great argument because some people would say yes, it should, and some people would say no, it should not. Should the United States adopt a universal basic income? That's a great question because some people will say yes, it should, and some people would say no, it should not. A great argument starts with a question where not everybody is going to have the same answer. So a lot of you, when you look up here and you look at some of your questions, I'm going to say, hey, how can we get to a problem that's connected to one of these questions here? Here's another one I really like. Should marriage counseling be mandatory for couples who wish to divorce? Some people would say yes, they should, and other people say no, that's a bad idea. So let's think about it. If people are arguing about this, in arguing, it's clear that there's going to be problems that arise because of this argument, or the problems may have arisen before the argument. So I wanted to see if you can start looking at your questions here and seeing if you can transform your question into some kind of problem statement. So I've got some samples here, and here's one. Again, it says, should students focus on salary when choosing a college major? That's a great argument. Some people say, yeah, focus on salary. Other people say, no, salary is not the most important thing. But let's look at this. What are some problems related to this question? Well, one problem that I see is that many Americans don't like their jobs. So maybe if they had focused on something other than what they did, they might like their job better. Here's another one. Many good paying jobs go unfilled because workers don't have the right skills for them. So you can brainstorm a lot of different problems here related to one of your questions. The key for you is to find a problem that will allow you to bring your essay to a close as you present the problem and then present a solution to that problem. Here's another one. It says, is capitalism the reason there's so much depression in the United States? Now, that's a great question, but I'm not sure. What could the problems be related to that? And then when I started thinking, I'm like, well, depression is ignored and not treated as a serious illness in America. That's a problem. Here's another one. The American economy is not good at providing for the poor or the sick. We can see that now during this coronavirus, where many businesses, in order to survive, are having to fire all their workers. So this is definitely a problem related to this question right here. Here's another one. Should American workers be worried about the increased use of robots and automation in the workplace? It's a great question, but what are some problems that are related to that? Well, here's one, that many good paying jobs in America will be lost in a few years because robots are going to be doing those jobs. That's a problem. Here's another problem. Economies that do not modernize will fall behind. So these two problems are kind of like opposites. This one sees the use of robots as a threat, but this problem says if you don't use robots, your economy might crash. Here's another one. Should marriage counseling be mandatory for couples who wish to divorce? Great question, but where's a problem that might relate to that? Well, here's an obvious problem. Statistics say this, that too many marriages in America end in divorce. That's a problem. Here's another problem. Divorce causes economic hardship for children. So your first job is to identify the problem that's related to the question that you want to write about. Now, once you've done that and you've come up with it, you're going to be able to fill in this little box right here, and then you're going to propose a solution to it. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you a model of what this looks like. This is not a lot of writing. This is part one. And part one you're going to turn in separately from part two. It says right here, do not go on to part two of this assignment until your teacher has approved part one. So that means either through email or through telephone, you and I will be talking about it. So let's go down here and let's look at the sample right here. This is the research problem that I had. Should teachers' salaries depend on their students' FSA and EOC scores? From this question, I came up with this problem. States that rely on student test scores the most are also the ones that have the lowest salaries, leading to teachers going on strike. Teachers going on strike, that's a big problem. Teachers are not coming to classrooms and students are not learning. So if this is my problem, and I'm convinced that yes, this problem is related to my question, what's going to be my solution to it? And this is where you got to spend some time thinking. You got to spend a lot of time thinking, because this solution is what you're going to be writing about in your final paragraphs. So here's my solution to this problem. States should use test scores not to make salary calculations, but only to pay bonuses to teachers whose students make big learning gains on those tests. So I think this is a pretty sophisticated solution there. It took me a lot of thinking, but I had already written 3 body paragraphs from my IWA. I've already written 2 counter arguments, so I understood this problem pretty well. It wasn't hard for me to write my solution. Now, once this gets approved on a different assignment, I'm going to ask you to do part 2. Once you've done part 1 and part 2, I think you're going to be ready to write your solution. But let's look at some of these questions I want to know about. So what are some terms or vocabulary or terminology someone would need to be familiar with to understand your problem and solution? So for me, some of those keywords are pay for performance, value-added models, learning gains. Anyone who's researched their problem a lot would already know what are some of the key what are some of the key words. Now it says, do you have any evidence from any source